Oh, hello. Well, last man standing. So I confess I feel a little sheepish and embarrassed after all these serious academic, scholarly presentations. Now you'll be treated to, if that's the right word, to a somewhat lightweight journalistic overview of what's going on in hydrogen. That's about the best I can do, I'm afraid. Let me start by saying the Bali roadmap of last December and the persuasive series of reports earlier last year by the IPCC have at long last produced basic agreement among most nations that we have to do something about global warming. The elephant in the room is how. An answer, and arguably one of the best ones, came from Europe's parliamentarians in Strasbourg in May of 2007. The Parliament overwhelmingly adopted a declaration calling for a green hydrogen economy and a, quote, excuse me, third industrial revolution. I'm happy to report that the revolution is slowly, in a small way, getting underway in different parts of the world. And I will be getting back to some examples later on some of the examples. But the one that is most impressive right now, in terms of funding and scope, is in an, at first blush, unlikely place in Abu Dhabi, one of the 7 members of the United Arab Emirates of the Persian Gulf. There, the government has launched the Masdar initiative, a $15 billion, B as in boy, billion, undertaking that includes construction of Masdar City, a car-free and waste-free city of 50,000 that will be powered entirely by solar, wind, and hydrogen energy, including a 420 megawatt super efficient power plant that will be fueled by hydrogen derived from natural gas that until now has been re-injected into the oil fields to enhance oil production. This is not some Fata Morgana shimmering in the desert. Ground was broken for this project in mid-February, and the participants and contractors include some internationally well-known corporate names, such as British star architect Sir Norman Foster, who is the city's master planner, the American construction management firm of CH2M Hill, and the UK's British Petroleum and Rio Tinto in a joint venture to design and build the hydrogen power plant. The master organizers describe it as the most ambitious government-funded sustainability program ever, and I sort of like to believe it. The $15 billion they are talking about so far is intended to be only seed money, as the initiative expects to attract additional funding for other sustainable energy projects, not only in Abu Dhabi, but in other parts of the Middle East and elsewhere. Still, in the world of global energy economics, even this stupendous amount isn't all that big. OPEC Secretary General, I can't pronounce his name, Abdallah Salam el-Badri, okay, I got it, told the German news magazine Spiegel in January that the 13 OPEC members, OPEC member countries, have already committed or have spent 10 times as much, $150 billion, on new oil projects through 2012. All right. Let me go on. The basic issues are no longer in doubt, despite what some of the persistent naysayers claim. Less well known is, and I think this came out earlier in some other presentations, CO2, some CO2 stays in the atmosphere a lot longer than previously believed, hundreds, maybe thousands of years, for all practical purposes, quote, forever, unquote, according to NASA's James Hansen, thus stabilizing and reducing global CO2 levels. Well, I'm repeating what has been said before, but I'm saying it anyway. In our atmosphere must become a global priority. As IPCC Chairman Pachauri explained in his Nobel Peace Prize acceptance speech, in order to stabilize carbon dioxide emissions at 445 to 490 parts per million, CO2 emissions would have to peak between now and 2015, and then would have to decline. And that's 7 years from now. That's roughly the life cycle of designing a new car, I believe, something like that. But even if stabilization were achieved, and there seems to be large doubt about that, global sea level rises are likely to continue above pre-industrial levels somewhere between 1.3 and 4.49 feet, according to Pachauri. So, it's one solution that's been studied exhaustively all over the world, at least since the 1970s, after the first oil shock, is to substitute the quintessentially carbon-free, by definition environmentally benign, chemical hydrogen for fossil fuels. However, there's a problem, in this country at least. In the United States in recent years, hydrogen has largely slipped off the radar screen of environmental interest, elbowed aside in the public's perception by other suggestions. These include, and many of these were already mentioned today, carbon tax and carbon trading, carbon sequestration, tougher energy conservation, higher energy efficiency standards, alternatives such as plug-in hybrids, biofuels, biodiesel, ethanol, clean coal, wind and wave power, solar energy and geothermal energy, and even advanced nuclear power, of course. All are obviously helpful and need to be engaged. What they are most likely, at least this is what the people in the hydrogen community think, are intermittent measures, things that will buy us time and are basically, I won't say band-aids, but they are things which we have to do because we need to attack energy problems on all fronts. But we must think in the long term, we must think, we have to stop in the long term, stop putting carbon into the air in the first place, not take it out afterwards. We must start moving towards the carbon-free fuel, hydrogen, now to begin veering away from catastrophe. Both short-term approaches, these are the ones we have been discussing all day long pretty much, and longer-term approaches are needed, which would mean hydrogen, especially given the rapidly growing economies of China and India. In 2006, according to what I've read, China alone added 96,000 megawatts of new coal-burning power plants without any CO2 cleanup to its energy generation capacity. That's nearly double that of California's output, apparently. The US, as a major contributor to greenhouse gases, and with China set to taking the lead, must become the pace setter in drastically reducing emissions and investing in new technologies which the world can adopt. With global energy demand to forecast, by the numbers that I have, to grow by 60% by 2030, the world's growing population will need all the energy it can get. But we will also produce 60% more CO2 unless we change our fossil fuel habits. While the ultimate goal in hydrogen production is renewable hydrogen, the magnitude of the energy challenge dictates the use of hydrogen produced from major energy sources such as coal with carbon sequestration and nuclear. But a vigorous longer-term approach with carbon-free hydrogen and fuel cell technologies can play a central role. While there are many challenges, there are no apparent showstoppers that couldn't be addressed by well-funded, dedicated programs and with the necessary political will in the US and elsewhere. A little bit of background on hydrogen, where the hydrogen community thinks the big advantage lies. Hydrogen is an energy carrier, as you all well know, and an energy source, but it can serve to unify and unite just about all other forms of energy. Today, it is produced most economically still from natural gas, which is ultimately a dead end. In the future, renewable hydrogen can be obtained by splitting water via electrolysis, with solar electricity by other methods, from biofuels and biomethane and many other sources, like that other energy carrier, electricity, which is also generated from many sources. To the hydrogen supporters, the hydrogen community, there's a beautiful symmetry in the fact that hydrogen and electricity are complementary. Hydrogen can be produced from water by running an electric current through it by an electrolyzer, and when reversing the process in a fuel cell, which is an electrolyzer in reverse, hydrogen recombines electrochemically with the air's oxygen to produce electricity, pure water, and some heat. Jeffrey Ballard, the founder of the pretty well-known fuel cell company, Ballard Power Systems, has coined the term hadricity to describe the symbiosis. And also a number of energy thinkers see significance in the historical fact that the ratio of hydrogen to carbon in our chemical fuels has steadily increased over the centuries, from very little hydrogen and lots of carbon in peat and wood to less carbon and more hydrogen, successively in coal, oil, and natural gas. By this analysis, seemingly inevitable endgame is pure hydrogen as a chemical fuel and no carbon at all. Claude Roulet, an executive with a company intimately linked to big oil, Schlumberger or Schlumberger Carbon Services, has said that while electricity was the energy carrier of the last 2 centuries, quote, hydrogen is the energy carrier of the 21st century. As I already mentioned, a big problem is that for some time now, the US has been in danger of falling behind Europe and Japan in recognizing hydrogen's value and in providing the consistent long-term investment needed. In fact, the latest 2009 budget request by DOE cut out renewable hydrogen production programs completely. And I believe the entire EERE program, which is energy efficiency and renewable energy, is down by about a third. Here, hydrogen is frequently undervalued even by many clean energy advocates. It's still too far in the future, too inefficient. Biofuels and renewably generated electricity, as well as all the other suggestions, such as carbon trading, carbon taxes, et cetera, are frequently touted as better and nearer-term solutions to the CO2 threat. It has created deep divisions and fairly bitter fights among clean energy supporters. For example, last December, the Los Angeles Times reported on something that had been brewing underground for some time, namely that the supporters of the 2 principal green transportation technologies, hydrogen fuel cells and plug-in hybrids, are, and I quote, squared off in an increasingly bitter fight, vying for publicity, manufacturer acceptance, favorable regulation, and especially funding for research and investment in infrastructure and marketing, unquote. One of the principal doubters in recent years has been Joseph Rome, a former high-level DOE official and now executive director of the Washington think tank Center for Energy and Climate Solutions. His 2004 book, The Hype About Hydrogen, is frequently held up as succinct documentation of what's wrong with hydrogen and why other alternatives are better choices. Another doubter is a Swiss scientist, Ulf Bossel, who supports the renewable energy society, the renewable energy economy, but without conversion to hydrogen, which he believes is too inefficient and wasteful. Just in passing, let me point out that there also have been a few recent books which promote hydrogen energy as one of the number of technologies that could help resolve our problems, our climate dilemma. One of the first and probably better known ones was Jeremy Rifkin's 2002 book, The Hydrogen Economy, which in a key sentence postulated, quote, hydrogen, because of its universality, offers a prospect that we might be able, at long last, to democratize energy and empower every human being on Earth, unquote. A similar theme was struck by the energy correspondent for Britain's The Economist, Vijay Vaidhishwaran, in his 2003 book, Power to the People. Last year, S. David Freeman, the somewhat iconoclastic elder statesman of public power, a public utility executive, mind you, and advisor to Presidents Carter and Johnson, and now president of the Port of Los Angeles, wrote in his book, Winning Our Energy Independence, that, quote, renewable energy and aggressive use of energy efficiency, including hydrogen as transportation fuel, can defeat what he calls the 3 poisons: coal, oil, and nuclear power. Finally, David Sanborn Scott, a Canadian environmentalist, engineer, and prominent longtime hydrogen supporter, in his 2007 book, Smelling Land, The Hydrogen Defense Against Climate Catastrophe, says that hydrogen intertwined with electricity, including nuclear power, as opposed to what Freeman says, as essential ingredient, as hydricity, are the centerpiece of the future energy economy. Also, I'd like to mention briefly, with this rapidly spreading awareness of the imminence of global warming It has become clear that biofuels are problematical and probably not the total answer. Some examples. The New York Times reported in February on 2 studies published back-to-back by the respected journal Science that said biofuels may be as much as or more of a greenhouse menace as today's gasoline and diesel. Some people have referred to this already today. The Times headline was, quote, studies called biofuels greenhouse threat. The reports looked at the use of croplands and land clearing to divert land from food to fuel production and concluded, in the words of one scientist, most of the biofuel that people are using or planning to use would probably increase greenhouse gases substantially, unquote. The only exception, concluded one study, would be biofuels made from waste biomass, such as sugarcane in Brazil, and, or biomass grown on abandoned agricultural lands planted with perennials. A third paper, published just a couple of weeks earlier by the World Resources Institute, said pretty much the same thing. Quote, while biofuels do have the potential to play some role in meeting future energy demand, large-scale carbon displacement would require such significant disruption to global agriculture and forests that the benefits of today's biofuels would likely be outweighed by the cost with respect to forestry, agriculture markets, and economic hardship to the world's poor. And then there was an interesting flip side to this in a study that was released last year that says that the potential for producing much more carbon-free chemical fuel per acre via solar and wind energy converted to hydrogen were outlined in an analysis last fall by a German think tank, LBST, a group that has done a great deal of work for national studies for the European Union and well-to-wheel studies for General Motors. The bottom line was that renewable electricity generated from PV and wind and used to split water can generate as much as 10 times the amount of energy in form of hydrogen fuel that could be produced from the same acreage as biofuel. Admittedly, the study did not say what the costs would be, so this was something which is still up in the air. PV was found to produce the most fuel per acre, but wind would still be better than biofuels, and it would have the added advantage of retaining much of the farmland, under some scenarios as much as 99%, to grow crops. All right, aside from the scholarly debates and arguments, to me at least, one of the best practical, hands-on examples of far-sighted thinking is provided perhaps by the folks who are usually regarded as dragging the heels when it comes to innovation, the car makers, both here and abroad. With billions of dollars in future sales and their very survival at stake, almost all the major ones believe hydrogen is the long-term, I emphasize, key to reducing the global warming threat by avoiding putting CO2 into the atmosphere in the first place. Manufacturers such as GM, here is shown the fuel cell Volt at the Shanghai Auto Show. This is a fuel cell vehicle. And BMW, this was BMW at a fleet test in Berlin. You see me here posing as a mad scientist trying to refuel a liquid hydrogen-powered BMW. Are starting to place fleets of around 100 hydrogen cars each, both fuel cells and with internal combustion engines, into the hand of ordinary drivers in the US, Europe, and Asia, including China, to gain operational data, market experience, and obviously as a public relations exercise as well. En route, the manufacturers have to pass through a financial, quote, valley of death, as GM's fuel cell chief, Byron McCormick, put it to a DOE advisory committee in January of last year. Right now, these first-generation vehicles cost $1 million apiece. But in terms of corporate planning, that's already history. Its costs are coming down. Car makers plan to produce 500 vehicles each in the 2010 to 2012 time frame, called the pilot commercialization phase, at about $250,000 each, which is still pricey, but it's one quarter. McCormick said the third phase, the early commercialization phase, starting around 2013, is expected to see manufacturers produce perhaps 10,000 vehicles costing around $50,000 in the first year, and then dropping, hopefully, to much lower numbers by 2015. Cutting costs. Fuel and fuel cell costs and a lack of fueling infrastructure are still problematical, but solvable, with strong political will and close industry and government cooperation. Efforts to figure out these and other problems, onboard hydrogen storage, a key issue, have a way to go. A survey last year by the online news service Fuel Cell Today found that more than 160 hydrogen stations were likely to be up and running by the end of the year worldwide. The German web database HiWeb says the total number of stations existing, planned, or already shut down is now about 300. GM's research vice president Larry Burns, on the other hand, has said the US would need about 12,000 fueling stations to meet 70% of the country's hydrogen fueling needs, a fairly small number considering there are an estimated 170,000 regular gas stations in the US right now. As to fuel costs, GM has said about a year ago that at $5 per kilogram of hydrogen, and a kilogram of hydrogen is roughly comparable in energy content to a gallon of gasoline, fuel cell cars could provide transport at about 10 cents a mile, assuming the fuel cell has about 2.5 times the efficiency of an internal gasoline engine with comparable power. And fuel cell costs, computed on the basis of producing 500,000 units annually, nobody has done this so far, these are all computer exercises, have been estimated by DOE now to be about $107 per kilowatt, which is a lot less than the baseline $275 per kilowatt estimated in 2002, but still far above the 2015 target of $30 a kilowatt, which is very roughly the ballpark figure of the cost of an IC engine today. The revolution really has gotten underway in a small way, as I was saying at the beginning. The good news is it has started with budding, albeit very still expensive, example sprouting, Johnny Appleseed style all over the globe. Let me quickly show you a few examples. These are mostly very mundane pieces of equipment and things, 2 or 3 which are sort of sci-fi-ish almost, but most of them look like machinery which you would not associate. They don't scream hydrogen as such, but they are interesting in the sense that they show the various applications where hydrogen comes into play. First of all, the next 3 Olympic Games in Beijing this year, in Vancouver 2010, in London in 2012, will feature hydrogen-powered vehicles, including buses, probably some VIP cars, with both fuel cell and internal combustion engines, as a determined push to help force hydrogen into the marketplace. Here is a Daimler hydrogen fuel cell bus brought to Beijing 4 years ago as a demonstration. Also, as another PR ploy, which I thought was kind of brilliant, Virgin Atlantic just announced that they will use 3 General Motors fuel cell Equinox vehicles, which are basically SUVs running on fuel cells and hydrogen, to ferry VIPs from the Los Angeles airport to wherever they're going. Some other examples. This here is a Caterpillar diesel mine loader that is being converted to fuel cell power by a Denver organization, Vehicle Projects. And this is a Caterpillar farm tractor whose diesel engine has been modified by a student team at the University of North Dakota to run partially on hydrogen. Adding hydrogen to the fuel stream cleans up the diesel fuel somewhat. It's not perfectly pristine clean then, but still cleans it up somewhat. It reduces emissions and improves power and torque. Here's a big diesel electric switchyard locomotive that is also being converted by the same folks at Vehicle Projects. What's interesting here is that the technological cross-fertilization. The locomotive uses essentially the same fuel cell stacks and the same compressed hydrogen gas storage tanks that are used in the Daimler fuel cell bus, which we saw in Beijing. The fuel cells were built by Ballard Power Systems in the compressed hydrogen gas storage tanks were made by another Canadian company, Nanoptek. In Japan, the Railway Technical Research Institute 2 years ago began the first test runs of a fuel cell railway locomotive, a 33-ton suburban railway car powered by 125 kilowatt Nuvera PEM fuel cells. Nuvera is a joint Italian-American company to provide the electricity to run the 95 kilowatt electric motors. And here is a construction site vehicle called a Gator, sold by John Deere, converted to fuel cell propulsion by another Canadian firm, Hydrogenics, a few years ago. Please note in the insert in the lower right corner, there are standard electrical outlets, so the vehicle can run lights or tools on a construction site, for example. And now, this is a fuel cell powered tricycle called a Cargobike that's being tried out by the German phone company Telekom, T-Mobile, same people, as a service vehicle for its technicians in Berlin. Telekom is operating 14 of them on an extended test. It can carry up to 300 pounds of gear, tools, equipment, whatever, up to 156 miles on about 90 grams of hydrogen as a fuel for the 250-watt PEM fuel cell. And best of all, you can ride it on a bicycle path around the city, bypassing traffic jams, and you don't need a driver's license. And here, this next one is something which might be really revolutionary. It looks like something from outer space. It's a solar hydrogen generator developed by a small Massachusetts company called Nanoptek, or Nanoptek. Essentially, the device splits water into hydrogen and oxygen with the help of titanium oxide, a phenomenon first discovered by a couple of Japanese scientists in the 1970s. But normal titanium oxide can use only the ultraviolet part of the solar spectrum for that. And that's not very efficient. It doesn't produce much hydrogen. Nanoptek now has applied some very sophisticated advanced semiconductor technologies to strain, quote unquote, the titanium oxide with the result that it now accepts also visible light to break up water molecules, making the whole process much more efficient and economical. Nanoptek has received funding from both NASA and the Energy Department. The company has not divulged any details such as efficiencies and solar conversion rates, but it expects, at least that's what they tell me, its technology will eventually produce hydrogen fuel that will be cost competitive with our current fuels like gasoline. So far, it is actually beginning to scout locations to set up the first solar hydrogen farms fairly soon for small volume, high value hydrogen production for industrial applications such as electronics and glass manufacturing, maybe generator cooling. But large volume production is still ways down the road. And this next one shows a automated high volume fuel cell assembly line, the first anywhere in the world, developed by a California company called Altergy Systems last summer. Mass production is key to bringing the costs down. And Altergy claims automation and volume cuts, automation of the system, and the volume increases, cuts the cost of the unit in about half. In New Jersey, an inventor and longtime hydrogen advocate, Mike Strizki, is now showing visitors his house in Hopewell converted to grid-independent solar hydrogen operation, including hydrogen production for his fuel cell car. This was the subject of a long article in the New York Times Magazine in May of 2007. It's pricey, $500,000. Strizki says, but his next similar project in the Cayman Islands is likely to cost less than half of that. Other solar hydrogen houses have been built or converted on Long Island. There's a building run by the U.S. Merchant Marine Academy near Wiscasset, Maine, on Stewart Island, Washington, in Indonesia, and decades ago in Freiburg, Germany, and in Switzerland. I'm getting close to the end, so bear with me. Iceland, widely regarded as a new frontier of the coming global hydrogen economy, expects to be able to offer hydrogen-fueled rental cars via Hertz for tourists this spring. And it is equipping this whale-watching tourist ship with a fuel cell for onboard power generation as a precursor and testbed to eventually convert its fishing fleet, mainstay of Iceland's economy, to fuel cell power. It also, since this is only an auxiliary power unit replacing a diesel, it makes the ship completely quiet when they stop the main engines to watch the whales, which helps, presumably has some benefit to the whales as well. Both Iceland and Norway have ordered, thank you, dozens of hydrogen Priuses converted to hydrogen, which is a really neat idea. Prius, as you know, is an internal combustion hybrid running on gasoline, but there's a company in California named Quantum Fuel Systems Technologies Worldwide, and they've converted something like 30 Priuses for hydrogen operation for several communities in the Los Angeles basin, and now also for Norway and for Iceland. Now we come to the science fiction part, perhaps. To my non-nautical mind at least, truly exciting idea with a whiff of disruptive technology is the concept of a high-speed liquid hydrogen-powered cargo catamaran freighter that was presented at the last World Hydrogen Energy Conference in Lyon, France in 2006. The H2 Ocean Jet is being developed by a young Dutch naval architect, Ivo Veldhuis. It's the University of Southampton. The ship would be 175 meters long, would be powered by 4 huge liquid hydrogen-fueled turbines that would drive equally huge water jets, the same idea as a water ski vessel, basically, and at more than twice the speed of current container ships. It would cover the 5,500 miles from Yokohama to Long Beach in about 76 hours, he estimates. And getting close to the end, hydrogen fuel cells are even taken to the air in Europe. There are 2 teams, one in Turin, Italy, sponsored by the European Union, and another organized by Boeing and headquartered in Madrid, that are planning to experimentally convert a very light Czech plane and an Austrian motor glider, respectively, to hybrid fuel cell battery electric engines, with the fuel cells for both coming from a British company, Intelligent Energy. And looking to the future, far to the future, I would say, the European Union is helping fund a European Space Agency study of a liquid hydrogen-fueled hypersonic transport plane, quaintly named LAPCAT, which stands for Long-Term Advanced Propulsion Concepts and Technologies, that could whisk, in theory, 300 passengers in up to about 4 hours from Brussels to Sydney, Australia. And I must say that the people who are doing this design worked on similar concepts in the 90s on something called HOTOL, which was a British companion development project to what some of you may remember, the National Aerospace Plane Project, which Ronald Reagan talked about, also New York, Lisbon, and New York, Sydney, 5 hours, whatever. So these guys are not exactly unexperienced, and since they have some European funding, at least they're doing a study, if nothing else. And finally, as a final example, something you're all using and familiar with, a Motorola cell phone. Here is a prototype with a tiny hydrogen-fueled fuel cell developed by another Canadian startup, Angstrom Power Incorporated. This was shown in January at the Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas. Angstrom says the fuel cell should roughly double the phone's runtime, and refueling with hydrogen should take about 10 minutes. So that's it. In conclusion, let me repeat what the European Parliament people said with their vote last year. We need an energy revolution to come to grips with global heating, one with carbon-free hydrogen as a central technology driver. I believe that, based on what I've just shown to you, the revolution has started, but it still needs a much bigger push and more convincing among many people to really succeed. Hydrogen obviously isn't the only weapon in the fight against global heating, but I'm convinced it's a key element in that fight. Thank you.
We have time for just a few questions, and then we'll have a brief closing comment.
Okay, 2 quick questions. I didn't hear you discuss the relative merits of getting the hydrogen through hydrolysis versus splitting it off the methane molecule. A second question is, what is the energy balance between the energy gained from using the hydrogen as fuel versus producing the fuel in the first place. I think I've read that that's not a very favorable balance.
Question number one, I think I can vaguely answer. Methane, you want to get away from fossil fuels. That's the whole point. Therefore, you want to go rather to electrolysis, hydrolysis, rather than driving for methane. On the energy balance, as I say, I just warned you before, and lightweight, high-speed, journalistic, once over lightly. So I'm afraid I can't answer that.
Was there one back there, Stephanie?
No.
Yeah. Hello?
Was there a second question? As I say, as I warned you at the beginning, journalistic once over lightly. I can't answer that one. Not offhand.
There's certainly a lot of advantages of hydrogen over fossil fuels in terms of the kind of air pollution that we get here in Salt Lake and in Los Angeles. And as a way of transmitting energy produced, through all sorts of sources. But in terms of global warming, the water vapor that's the output of combustion of hydrogen is also a greenhouse gas.
Right.
So how do you quantify the global warming effects of the water vapor versus the carbon dioxide it would be replacing?
I can't give you a specific number or data or anything like this, but I remember reading studies some years ago saying even if you burn gasoline, you put water vapor into the air for one thing, or fossil fuels. Secondly, whatever additional water vapors would go in the atmosphere, this was a German meteorologist whose name I forget right now, the effect would be minimal, minuscule. And again, I'm sorry to say I can't give you anything more specific than that, but from what I've heard in general in the last few years by the community, or people in the community, it does not seem to be a great issue.
Why don't we take two more questions?
In comparing hydrogen versus electricity as energy carriers for
Right.
transportation fuels,
Yeah.
it seems like for electricity there's an existing infrastructure, and for hydrogen there would need to be a financial investment for that. Can you talk a little bit about that and why it's worth that financial investment rather than just going with electricity?
All I can tell you is that, as I said, if you go to plug-in hybrids and electric cars, well, one thing I've read off and on, again I don't know the specifics. So far, the battery tech. Oh yes, Byron McCormick, the man I mentioned, the General Motors fuel cell chief, he says, as far as this was a year ago, as far as he can see, there simply is no battery technology on the horizon to carry enough energy for the typical 300-mile range you want to get. It would be very heavy, very expensive. You'd have to. There are developments apparently underway, which will make for better battery, lithium-ion in more advanced stages. The last I heard was the Wall Street Journal of 3 days ago, in which Bob Lutz, the co-chairman of General Motors, said, maybe we don't have to go to fuel cells and hydrogen, maybe we can do batteries because new lithium-ion technology is on the way. But even that seems to be 10 years away or so. And also, don't forget, hydrogen is not just a fuel, would not just be a fuel for cars. It would also be a fuel for other applications, for example, aircraft. You can't run big aircraft on batteries, as far as I can see. But there have been instances of big transport passenger planes, the Russians namely, Tupolev converted a trijet to hydrogen, running one engine on hydrogen just to try it out. It flew at various demonstration parts in Europe, at the Berlin Air Show in Moscow. This was back in the late 80s, early 90s. So there are reasons why hydrogen might be a co-equal to electricity. Does that answer your question?
Great. And I just noticed the time. We may have to go to closing announcement. If that's okay.
Thank you.